All right, so this is our open meeting for March 30th, 2021. We have Dan Bader, Marson, and Joe Benham here, and we have decided that we would like to hear Dan Bader speak about his experience in the mental health field when he was trying to promote we have decided, we've been debating it here in Citizen Assembly. It is a wonderful, wonderful presentation of how to beat the vicious cycle of poverty, substance abuse, and mental health issues. And so he's going to discuss with us the problems that he encountered in trying to enable this system. So go ahead, Dan, please.
Okay, thank you. So I think I would start by just mentioning that psychiatry is the dominant force in the mental health world, along with the pharmaceutical companies that manufacture the drugs for psychiatric conditions. And it's important to remember or realize that until 1980, we could say post-World War II through 1980, psychiatrists mostly had been educated in whole or in part as talk therapists. Not all, because we had psychiatric, hospitals which existed, and the psychiatrists who worked there were dealing with inpatient care, heavily medicated individuals. But the psychiatry in those days it had a psychodynamic orientation, a kind of a Freudian orientation. And the psychiatrists were talk therapists. And they would, they'd make good money having therapy sessions. It could go on for years with people. And what happened was different professional groupings. We had the first one were the clinical psychologists. Clinical psychologists had originally worked as people who administered tests. They got a lot of experience and practice during World War II. And they then began to do talk therapy. And then we had social workers at some point, I can't remember when. And then we had, the other counselors, marriage, family therapists, much later down the road. But once they started doing testing, kind of, experimental kind of design testing, comparing the talk therapy effectiveness of psychiatrists versus, let's say, clinical psychologists back in the 1970s. What they discovered was, well, there's not really any difference, that a clinical psychologist could get just as good of a result, sometimes using a non-Freudian psychodynamic orientation, than as the psychiatrist. Yes, Stacy.
Do you agree with that?
Do I agree with what?
That there is this equality in practices. Did you find that to be true?
Oh, well, it clearly was the case, because that's what drove psychiatry as an institution in 1980, when they came out with a new version of the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. I think it was DSM number 3. The first two, DSM-1 and DSM-2, were strictly from a psychodynamic orientation. That's how they diagnosed, and that's what it was talked about. I think that DSM-1 was probably out in 1952, I'm going to say. DSM-2 was probably published around 1968. And then in 1980, they went to DSM-3, which was the beginning of the medication revolution. It's done nothing but go forward. So psychiatrists stopped being talk therapists. There still were a few, of course, and there still are today a few, but mostly they give medication. They have usually a 20-minute appointment with somebody. They'll ask the person, how are you doing? How are you feeling? Et cetera. Any change in your medical conditions, that kind of thing. And then they'll give them the prescription. And that's it. 20 minutes, next person in. And so that essentially is the way it's been, the way it is now. It's just totally, most psychiatrists give out medication. And they don't really know how to do much else than that. It's strictly, they have a big professional interest in the medications. So in 1980, DSM-3 came out, and then probably in 1987, they had DSM-3 TR, I think they, where they're making an updated version. And then finally DSM-4 was put out in 1994. And now we have DSM-5, which came out in 2013. A lot of similarities, but here's the thing. So there's 4 kinds of medications, general classes of medications that psychiatrists prescribe. We have the antidepressants, which most people are very familiar with. They have different types of, before the SSRI antidepressants, the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, before they came out with these are the Prozac, Paxil type drugs. Before they came out with those, which, I think they had the first bit of marketing maybe in the very late 1980s. But prior to that time, they would give out these other antidepressants, which were kind of a different class. And they too supposedly affected the level of the neurotransmitter serotonin. So we have the antidepressants, that's mostly SSRI medications. We also have anti-anxiety medications. A lot of them are, benzodiazepine type drugs. Back in the 70s, I think it was, or, they came up with Valium, which was, a famous drug, which was a benzodiazepine, and they have numerous versions of benzodiazepines, and those are prescribed for anxiety. And there's a couple of other, there may be another 1 or 2 anti-anxiety medications that aren't benzodiazepines. And then we have the mood instability medications. That's for people, the bipolar disorder, manic depressive disorders. And these mood stabilization medications are problematic. They're supposed, lithium was the oldest one that was used. It's again kind of a famous, mood stabilizer, and they have a number of newer types, but they also use antipsychotic medications for these other conditions. So here's how it goes in reality. So let's say somebody comes in and they're depressed. They say they're sad, they're having maybe some suicidal thoughts, ideation. They don't have any energy. They're not interested in anything anymore. So they'll get a diagnosis, one of the depression diagnoses, and they'll be prescribed an antidepressant. And they'll probably be referred to therapy too, but they'll get an antidepressant. And it's not only psychiatrists which will give out antidepressants and these drugs nowadays. PCPs also can do it, and they do. So you would get an antidepressant, but here it is, it's a drug. And if it works for a person, what it tends to do, the SSRIs I'm talking about here, it's kind of a stimulant. Sometimes people would describe, Zoloft as, I felt like I was at 20 cups of coffee or something. These SSRI antidepressants are mild stimulants. Now, so Stacy, from the three building blocks framework. Interest, excitement is the emotion that comes with stimulating drugs. And so, what does that do? That will suppress to some degree shame, guilt, sadness. Won't necessarily take away anger, but it will work on definitely sadness, shame, sadness, and anxiety in some cases. So you're taking a drug, an antidepressant drug. At a certain point, most people will start to develop a tolerance for the drug. Now, once you develop a tolerance for the drug, it still may have some use. It doesn't mean that it doesn't have any effect. But what happens is if somebody starts having problems and they're already on an antidepressant, let's say they're taking Paxil. So the psychiatrist generally, what they will do is they'll up the dosage. So you'll get an increase in the dosage, and that will probably work for a while. But at a certain point in time, they're going to hit the ceiling. In other words, you can't give any more of this particular medication. At that point in time, they'll generally give you a second medication. And they might even say, well, your depression, your depressive disorder is now treatment resistant. And then once they go there, they can now get to some serious interventions, like maybe you need one of these newer antipsychotic medications to be added into the mix. Or maybe you need one of, in some places they still do, ECT, convulsive therapy. Even in a couple of places, I think, I don't know whether it's the University of Mississippi or Alabama, and I'm not sure it's going on today, but it was not that long ago. They will still do psychosurgery. So that's kind of how it goes. Now, what happens is, if you're taking medication and you're not, let's say, again, kind of going to the three building blocks point of view, you're not learning you never learn to manage emotions. You don't know how to set boundaries, and you really aren't taking care of your human needs in an effective fashion. That makes you vulnerable still to have problems with emotional pain. And the medication can act as a partial anesthetic, or in some cases, if they give you enough, it'll be a complete anesthetic. As we see, they'll zombify you. So anyway, so that's kind of the way it goes. Now with the antipsychotic medications, they had the old style ones like Haldol, and that's what they still use. If you happen to have to go into a psychiatric hospital and you're having behavioral control problems, you're agitated, angry, aggressive, they're going to probably give you an injection of Haldol or something similar to that. And that will knock you out and down. And it's very unpleasant. It's a very unpleasant kind of a medication. The newer antipsychotic medications like Zyprexa and Seroquel, Geodon, but they are more pleasant to take. Actually, Zyprexa and Seroquel are used very frequently for people who have strong anxiety problems. They'll actually give that out. And of course, they'll help people sleep. But again, all of these medications tend to be addictive. People become, and it's not just a psychological dependency. And in a lot of these, with some of these drugs, it's a physical dependency. And it's very hard for the people to let it go. And we have to understand the motivation of psychiatry is to, it's a profession. You make money doing the work. That's what you do, like anybody else. And the way you're going to make your money is by prescribing medications. That's pretty much it. We've got plenty, from a psychiatry point of view, yeah, we've got the clinical psychologists, the social workers, the counselors, family therapists, whatever. We've got all of these people. They do therapy, but we prescribe the meds. And generally speaking, the psychiatrist will be the top dog, the authority figure. Yes.
Are there kickbacks, or is it just straight? I mean, why are they making more money by prescribing drugs than, say, talk therapy?
Well, they're doing it because there's a competition thing. It's like they're no different when it comes to talk therapy than a clinical psychologist, a social worker, a counselor, family therapist type person. There's no difference. So you've got all this competition because you have so many people working in those professions. They weren't there when psychiatry was talk therapy back in the 50s and the 60s and into the 70s. So it's just simply, as Cesare likes, just free market capitalism competition type of a thing with these providers. And so they make their money, and they have really since the 80s, prescribing medications. Obviously, for the pharmaceutical corporations, these psychiatric drugs have been huge moneymakers, huge. And so that's the, those are the interests as far as medication goes. And what unfortunately happens, I'd have clients, and I was, I used to tell a client, if you want to take medication, and the pros and the cons and everything, and the options, and you want to give informed consent, and you're going to take a psychiatric medication, that's your right as an adult. I have no problem with it. However, I would make sure, if it was my client, that they were aware of, the pros and the cons, and there's a lot of cons. And so that would be one way I would relate to it. The other thing I would, yes. Yeah.
How many people then, with your caveats, wanted the meds?
A lot. Now, there's a mix of people. There's a mix of people. I might not see some, in the mental health world, you might come across somebody who's already been taking, say, an antidepressant from 10 years that they got from their PCP nowadays. They've never seen a psychiatrist. They've really never, been in therapy even, just like that. There's lots of different people, and a lot of them, wanted medication. Actually, a lot of people too had already had not so satisfactory experiences with therapy. And I would argue that part of the reason that, they had problems with therapy is, again, they did not have the adequate psychoeducational input, and they just did not realize that even though, a therapist, they liked the therapist because the therapist was, if it's a, okay therapist, they're going to be very respectful of the client. They're going to have, they're going to be helpful. But the problem is, let's say that, as I like to, let's say the person has nutritional deficiencies, which so many of people do. And so they have serious micronutrient deficiencies, and they decide to take medication, and they also decide to take therapy. But if those micronutrient deficiencies aren't corrected at a certain point in time, neither the therapy or the medication is going to remove the symptomology. And they become frustrated. Well, I like the therapy, you're a good therapist, but I'm still having my symptoms. And again, with the medications, they're drugs. And if they work, all of them, if they work, they will partially anesthetize emotional pain. The one other situation, other than just somebody of their own free will, autonomous adult, I want to take it, that's fine. You know what's up, you understand, and you're going to do it. That's your business. The other situation where I think medication, well, two situations where I think medication is fine or okay. One is if somebody's having a full-blown breakdown, they're just out of control. And that usually implies they're having, maybe a lot of times it'll be they're having some paranoid ideation, they're delusional, they're angry, and they just need to get medicated to knock them down, just knock them out, give them some time and space to come back. And that's always justified if somebody, yes. Yeah.
Does it have to be Haldol or that kind of knockout, or can it be something that's just a sedative?
Well, there you go. And that's see, and they're going to give you, generally speaking, they will give you an antipsychotic. They won't give you, I used to say, well, why don't you just give them, I'd say, like, if I have to go in for a surgery, when they're prepping me, they're giving me IV benzodiazepine medication. It's very strong. It knocks me out. And when I come out of it, I'm in an okay mood. I'm not feeling like, I've been in a train wreck. And why don't they do it? Well, they don't do it generally. They just don't. I mean, it would be like, you think about the way they, when they execute prisoners, for crying out loud, they have to make it the most painful, ridiculously unpleasant way when they could actually put someone down very, very pleasantly and their life is over. Maybe that's enough. You don't have to make them suffer as they're going out. But these are bureaucratic rules, regulations, and people who work in psychiatric hospitals, they do what they're expected, and so on. So so the situation is that so when you go into mental health, you're going into the system. The system is going to be medication and or therapy. And if you need case management, they'll give you some case management. That usually means, they'll help you get your benefits or something of this nature, find housing, that kind of thing, which is very important for people who have that kind of a need. But the overall picture is not good. And the other group that you could justify medication for are people who really have almost a neurological problem, where their ability to perceive is very disrupted and in different ways. And, whether it's somebody who's, maybe they're hearing voices and, and again, usually the voices are very, very persecutorial, mean type of, voices, and or the voices are telling them, tempting them to do things that they really don't want to do. Their conscience doesn't want to go there, but, and they're just tortured. And you could justify, for some of these individuals, some of them, you could take, an antipsychotic medication, for example. But this is a very small group of people, very small. And the way psychiatry and the drug companies like to sell it is they like to pretend that everybody's the same. Everybody has, we're different, of course. You have depression. The person over there has agoraphobia, anxiety. Somebody else has, some mood instability problems. They're hypomanic, but in the end, it's all about neurotransmitter chemical imbalances in the brain. And the medication will set you right, give you, and that's what they sell. And yes. Yeah.
Okay, I don't know if this is the time to discuss it, but you're talking about the neurotransmitter issue. So is there another way to address the neurotransmitter issue?
Yeah, for sure. Because what everybody should do, and it's like I may have mentioned it to you at some point in the past, but you know, I was working for Chicago Department of Public Health, and to me, I love public health in theory because that was about, you know, primary prevention as part of it, where we're going to prevent people from needing uh, you know, mental health care from a, you know, a certain standpoint. Let's help people so they don't have to go there, or if they are there, let's get them out of there and they not have to go there again. Uh, uh, and so people, so I would say things like, look, let's get everybody tested, blood work for micronutrient deficiencies, hormonal imbalances, blood sugar dysregulation problems, you know, and also look at their, you know, macronutrient dietary habits, this kind of thing. But let's make sure that right away they get tested for these things, so they're not taking psychiatric medications unnecessarily, and they're not wasting years in therapy. And you know, I mean, no, and they wouldn't do it. They just, it's not even, you know, it's one of these things where the interests, the dominant public health authorities are very much really under the influence of the pharmaceutical corporations and all their lobbyists and marketers and everything. And and then when you have the psychiatrists making their living, you know, they're the doctor, right? They're the MD, they're the psychiatrist, and therefore, you know, it's a lot of authority. Yes.
So who did you specifically bring the idea to? Was it doctors or you're just people in the state?
Well, you know, so what I would do is, you know, I would bring it up to the administrators, both in the mental health division or, you know, sector, and also in the upper echelon. And I would, you know, whenever you know, I did some presentations, you know, for, say, the mental health sector within Chicago Department of Public Health. So all of the mental health people would be there, including the psychiatrists, the administrators, and sometimes people from, you know, outside of mental, they'd be there. And I would always, you know, just like I'm doing right now, I would always pound home, why don't we do something of this nature? And, you know, and I would have some debates sometimes with psychiatrists because they got offended, you know, because they didn't like what I was saying about, you know, their motivational, you know, where they're coming from, and so on. But what happens, Stacy, is nothing goes anywhere unless the upper echelon administration decides there's going to be a change in policy. Nothing will happen. And so in when you also have a government bureaucracy like the city of Chicago to deal with, you know, it's a huge problem, because if the people, you know, there's going to be a person, for example, they're called the Commissioner of Public Health. So there will be the top administrator in the public health department. But that person has to listen to whoever the mayor is. You know, when it was Rahm Emanuel, they listened to Rahm Emanuel. Now we have Lori Lightfoot, they listen to Lori Lightfoot. And before that, we had Richard Daley. But yes.
Are you saying that you couldn't get your initiatives done without it going up to that level, the mayor?
Well, it would have to go up to the upper echelon of the Chicago Department of Public Health administration. And anything that they're going to do, they're going to have an approval from the mayor's office on some level. Now, and you know, as we used to say, that means there's not going to be anything that's going to offend corporate interests of any kind very much. And you know, this is how it is. You know, I gave, you know, that hoarding slide deck I sent you, which when you get a chance, you know, the thing about that is, you'll notice in that version I sent you, I had 4 slides of hoards, an outdoor hoard, an indoor hoard, what I called a public storage hoard. And then I had what at that time, because you know, I called it the British Petroleum Koch brothers Petcoke hoard, which hovered over the southeast side of the city, and it would blow into the neighborhoods, and it was very toxic. And so here's what happened. When I had been given a green light to do that presentation, you know, I'd been working with a hoarding task force, and I was presenting, you know, for CDPH. And they gave me a green light on it. I presented it the first time at one of our libraries. It was heavily attended. We had some politicians there, got really good reviews. You know, I mean, I was really happy. You know, and so, but the very next day, I got a call from the public information officer. And what she said to me was, don't you talk to any media. Any media that contacts you, refer it to me, which, you know, I knew what is going on right away. And then, you know, she kind of left it at that. Then I had another scheduled presentation of the hoarding. And this was actually out in the neighborhood where the Petcoke pile was the problem. And there was a lot of, you know, environmental advocacy going on at the time about that. So suddenly I couldn't get a green light on presenting out there in that neighborhood, in that area. And I said, and this was being yes.
Go ahead and finish that thought. We have a hand up.
Okay, got it. So
Hi. I was just wondering, you know, was basically the threat that you'd lose your job if you went directly to the media or directly up the ladder to the upper echelon. And I'm wondering, like, if you could say, you know, hand off your idea to someone else who isn't threatened by that, and have them just not mention your name, and, you know, get the message up the ladder that way.
Yeah. So Joe, you know, it's kind of, yes, you know, we were under instructions. If you work for the city, you don't go to the media, regardless of where you are. That's correct. We were told you don't go to the media. If you get caught going to the media, your job situation isn't going to be very good, and it could conceivably, depending on some other variables, lead to you working elsewhere or not working. However, that's the issue. The thing that what, you know, with the hoarding presentation, what I had to do is I had to deal with an administrator in public health, and I finally, you know, I didn't want to disappoint the people who are expecting me to present, and so I just said to him, I finally said, look, I'll take that slide out, the one slide that was about the Petcoke hoard. And so I took it out, and then I immediately got a green light. That's how it worked. And that's how it does work. So, but even though, you know, that's the way the institution is, and by the way, with the media, back in, you know, 2008 or 2009, and all the way up until about maybe 2012, I was actively a participant in what we called the mental health movement in the city of Chicago, which was a movement to try to prevent, at that time, Mayor Daley from shutting down our public health clinics, which they wanted to do. And then there wouldn't be any, in my mind, there wouldn't be any chance of any kind of prevention, but they wanted to do that, and we fought. But what happens with the media? I mean, we would talk to, Chicago Tribune. Yes, Stacy.
Sorry, Joe has a question or a follow-up.
Sorry, Joe. Go ahead.
Well, yeah. So it's the idea that, if you leaked, would just, chances are it would come back to you, or that some innocent person would get blamed for it.
Well, okay. So in the situation I was talking about, leaking wouldn't have been an issue. However, I could. So, for example, let's say hypothetically, I would go talk to somebody who's a reporter on the Chicago Sun-Times or the Tribune or something of that nature. I go talk with them and I say, look, I've got this great idea. It's really important, I think, and they're just preventing it from even being seriously discussed. Okay, so again, the person, the reporter, because, it's not like it was, again, in our country, we don't have journalism like we maybe had post-World War II in the 50s, 60s, 70s, even into the 80s. We don't have that anymore. And if you're working for one of these, news media outlets, the censorship is really severe. And then who am I to be doing that? It's an end run, and it wouldn't go anywhere. They never did. I mean, on other, and that's what we all face. It's common sense would say, since there is sound, valid research that micronutrient deficiencies will cause you to have neurotransmitter problems, and therefore you're going to have more difficulty managing things. Now, common sense would say, before you start psychiatric medication with all the downsides there, potential, and a long course of therapy, why don't we have you check, get those things removed? And therefore, including hormonal imbalances and some other things, get that taken care of, and then you can start your therapy. And if you want to take psychiatric medication, fine, go ahead. But they won't. Yeah, Stacy.
Okay, so is this something that is purely with the Chicago Department of Health, that they won't do that kind of blood test first? If I go into a hospital with my health insurance, will I get that kind of care where they'll check my blood before they administer the medicines? Or is this just table, everybody does it?
No, it won't happen. Now, you could go in there, and if you have insurance, like I think Medicare now, for example, and maybe some, they'll go ahead and they will pay for that kind of testing, or at least a good portion of it. But it's not something that's going to happen, just like, oh yeah, we got to get you tested. What? And from a financial incentive, there's no financial incentive for psychiatry to do that. I mean, to even think about it, and they don't. And no, this is not just Chicago Department of Public Health. It's pretty much uniform. Yeah.
Okay, so you say there's no financial incentive. It sounds like the human incentive doesn't matter.
Well, I mean, no, it doesn't matter, because again, it's like, I would say this about, and I'm not talking here about wellness doctors or doctors who, are not exactly mainstream, but if I have, if I, like I had a while ago, I tore a rotator cuff, I know I can go get some pretty good surgery for that problem. And if I get shot or something, or I'm I know that emergency room medicine is going to be damn good, generally speaking. But the thing is, doctors are there to take care of you after you come down with whatever it is. They're not there to prevent you from getting sick. They only pay a little bit of lip service. probably even in the medical school curriculum today, I bet they probably only have at most, like one, I don't know whether it would be a quarter or a semester course in nutrition, if even that. And therefore, they are trained in according to the conceptual framework of medical interventions, and they're not into prevention. Yes, they'll pay lip. I mean, I used to. I knew that the biggest mental health advocacy organization, NAMI, National Alliance of Mental Illness, that is like, I don't know what it is today, but back a while, it was 75, 80% funded directly or indirectly from the pharmaceutical corporations. Well, so what that means is that they may do some good work around the edges and all of that, and not even, but the problem is they have to really be careful what they say about medication. And they are, and they basically promote medication. And you can see, yeah.
Are you in any danger or just fear of backlash for saying this stuff? Is there somebody who tries to quash it?
No, because, well, of course, I always battled as much as I could on anything I was involved in when I was working. Now I'm retired. So as somebody, what I planned to do when I retired was I was going to push, 3 building blocks of mental health orientation. And I planned to, go around, I got permission from the Chicago library system to go to any of the libraries, present. I would, go to some churches that were interested, and what I was planning to do was to, kind of do the preaching, the psychoeducational preaching. And that's what I was going to do. But I got distracted big time by other things that were going on, like climate change. And, that's what I actually hope to do. But it's a tall mountain to go up because, the reality is that as human beings, this is just my own analysis, we are, by human nature, we will listen to authority figures. They kind of become parental substitutes when you don't have the necessary knowledge or information to critically think about it yourself. And so when you have psychiatry, the doctors, when you have the pharmaceutical corporations, which, I think, on the mainstream media, I don't know, Robert Kennedy Jr. used to say they were funding 40 or 50% of everything. You know that you're living in an environment where mental health and really other medical things are very, very controlled. If you go to the American, and again, I don't know what it is today, but the American Diabetes Association, they're funded by all these food corporations, like Pepsi Cola or that kind of thing. That's absurd, and so what you get when they come out with their diets, they're not really as healthy as they really should be, what they recommend for diabetics. And you'll see it throughout. And any advocacy group, for example, if NAMI suddenly said, we need to tell people the truth about psychiatric medications, the dangers, blah, 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 what would happen is their funding would be taken away and there would be another group replacing them that would be happy to be helpful. That's what we're in. So what I used to do is when I'd go out to a community, I said go to a library out in one of our, many neighborhoods in Chicago, which are near poverty areas. And I would, and I would try to say, a good idea would be to try to get organized and be able to distribute information to prevent problems from happening. But again, and people would like my stuff. I never gave a presentation where people didn't, that's really interesting, or that's really good, or that kind of thing. But again, the problem is just, having a presentation or reading a book or this kind of thing, which people do, is generally not enough, because you have to be able to implement, a lot of things to actually make it work, or anything, to work.
So please tell us what that would be. What are those things that you have to follow up with?
Okay, so let's say from the 3 building blocks point of view, you have to learn to manage your emotions. It's a key thing. Well, in order to do that, it's like for those of you who might have seen when, I know you are aware of talking about anger management. Well, part of what you have to be able to do is have a script, or a number of scripts, that you're going to use when you encounter a very predictable situation where you're going to get angry. What is it you're going to say? How are you going to handle it? For example, and that's true for all of the emotions. I break it down to 5. You could break it, some people would break it to 8 or 16, but they all can pretty much be gathered in those 5 I use, those categories. But the thing is, if you don't practice that, and you don't even understand what's going on with the emotional energy, it's not going to change. It's instinctual. It's very powerful motivator. Yeah.
Are you saying that the emotions are a big part of this issue that we're talking about with mental health?
Yes. Yeah. You could you could go to any book on mental health, say therapy or this kind of thing. And you will find some kind of a presentation, one way or the other, whether it's psychodynamic, whether it's behavioral, cognitive behavioral, whatever. You will find that every single system has to focus on the emotions. It's just, think of, when somebody says they need a mental health help, they're usually suffering from emotional pain. That's it. And so you have to be able to learn how to manage the emotions. And you have to actually practice what you're doing. And if you don't, you won't be able to pull it off, because it's an instinct. And in real time, if you haven't, figured out what you're going to say to your brother or your parents or whoever, you're going to likely have a temper tantrum, and that's not good. And of course, and likewise with the setting of boundaries, the interpersonal boundaries, and another important area. So again, you have to have your scripts. You have to be able to rehearse what you're going to say when you're feeling that somebody is treating you unfairly or disrespectfully or just frustrating you. You need to know how you're going to address that.
Okay, so how would we implement that kind of thing in an impoverished neighborhood? Have you thought about that? Come up with something for that?
Yeah, what's interesting. So when I would have clients, I had a lot of clients that came from impoverished neighborhoods in Chicago, and they would the ones who had a little more leadership capacity would actually take, they'd have the 3 building blocks. They'd actually go out into their community, and they would maybe get together, a group of guys who were having addiction problems, or maybe they'd been incarcerated, something of this nature, and they were out now, and they would work it somewhat, and they might get a pretty good result. But in theory, what would have to be done is that kind of work but you would have to have a lot of people in a community who could be leaders, you know, and be able to teach what needs to be taught.
Are you talking about peer counseling kind of stuff?
It could be peer counseling. It could be you're working as a pastor at a church. You're a minister. You could basically, you could be taught it. People who are leaders in your church could be taught it. You know, I mean, if you look at if you look at psychoeducational material, and that's what the 3 building blocks is, it's just straight up psychoeducational kind of stuff. You know, people can understand it. They can, you know, people do need to be taught. They have to, you know, for example, let's say setting an interpersonal boundary. I would recommend that you just simply say to somebody, you know, respectfully, you know, they're insulting you or teasing, you know, please don't do that anymore. Don't do that. I need you to stop. Show me respect. You know, they write a little script like that. But let's say the person they're dealing with, you know, is not going to accept that boundary. They're just going to say, you know, F you, I'll do what I want. I'll say what I want. All right. So what do you do next? Well, you have to have another strategy if that's how it is. And I would usually recommend a distancing strategy. So if that person is not willing to respect you, then maybe you shouldn't spend any time with them or as little as possible. And if it's a situation where you can't either get them to just respect your boundary or you can't distance, I had, you know, I'd call it, you could fight fire with fire. You could say to somebody, say they were, you know, insulting you. You could say to them, you know what, I've asked you to give me respect, not say that to me, but you're continuing to do it. I want you to understand that I know you very well, and I could say things to you that would hurt your feelings, that would cause you to feel disrespect. I don't want to do that. I don't want to go there with you. So please respect me. You know, I call that fight fire with fire. And those are the kinds of things, you know, so people have to be taught, and they can develop their own script. They can develop their own strategies, you know, but they have to have a framework to work with. Yes.
So I guess what I hear you saying is that even after all these years, you feel like it needs to be done at a community level, that there's just too much corruption, money interests at the top. We're going to have to do this right down at the bottom grassroots level.
Yeah, absolutely, because that's how it is. You know, I don't like it. I wish that, you know, we didn't live in, you know, the kind of society that we have and the way it's structured right now, and it has been for a long time. And yeah, you know, it's just, you can't expect psychiatrists, you can't expect the pharmaceutical corporations to give up their interests. They'll never do it. Yeah.
All right, we're at that point where we need to go to closing remarks. That was fascinating. Thank you so much. I think this is going to be a really excellent instructional video that people will go back to. So thank you very much for that. Cynthia, do you have any closing remarks for us?
Oh my goodness, you know I do. As I was listening to the last of what Dan was saying about, you know, providing a place for people to be listened to and a place for them to be able to speak their truth without fear of, you know, major consequences, where people will actually listen and perhaps even understand what they're talking about. That sounds very much like Egora-ilp.org. That's Egora-ilp.org. And we are very proud of the beauty that we see coming to Citizen Assemblies. So thank you very much for having me. Love, gratitude.
Thanks so much, Cynthia. Love to have you. So happy to have you here. Marcin, do you have some closing remarks for us?
Yeah, this was a great talk. It honestly reminds me of a retired lawyer friend that I have, corrupted the legal system is, how judges get paid off and everything else. And it also reminds me of Bitcoin and regulations in general, how whenever a regulation body gets created, then the institutions that profit off of that regulation, off of that regulatory organization, whatever is regulated, try to take it over themselves, which is something that happened with Bitcoin when that came out. The people profiting and using Bitcoin and pushing Bitcoin created their own regulatory body, just so they wouldn't have to take it over later, because they knew it was going to eventually get regulated. So they're like, we're just going to create it ourselves and regulate it ourselves. So it just kind of reminds me of all that.
Thank you very much, Marcin. Thanks for coming tonight. Okay, thank you again, Dan. Dan, did you have any closing remarks?
Well, no, just, again, I really do enjoy this kind of community that's been formed via Citizen Assembly, Egora, et cetera. I think it's, very, very interesting, and actually theoretically, it's the right way to go. And I appreciate contributing. And I also really appreciate the very interesting topics that people bring up here and talk about. It's really good. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody. And we're going to hit the stop recording button now.